Oh, there you go. The stream is live.
Yeah, there we go. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in today. We are actually tuning in the afternoon Eastern Standard, morning if you're on the Pacific Coast, because today I have a wonderful guest with me today on today's stream. This is Sung Il. We actually met through the Cartoonist Co-op Discord server, and I was like, hey, does anybody want to talk about Autobio comics? And Sung raised Sung's hand and was like, oh, I would love to. So I wanted to bring them on here so that we could have a lovely little chat about comics and Autobio comics. So Sung, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing today, Kelsey?
I am fantastic. So let's actually start with greeting some of the folks who are in the chat with us. Hello, folks in the chat. If you have any questions, they will be answered towards the end of the talk. So we're going to be talking for about 30 to 45 minutes. And then towards the end of that, we can address audience questions. So you can feel free to leave those in the chat if you are interested. And with that, I actually want to start with my first question for you, Sung, which is how did you get into comics? Because you mentioned before we went live that you just recently got into the comics making as like almost like a business. Yeah. But like, were you making comics before that, or was this a new thing that you've discovered?
I've always wanted to make comics since I was younger. I was inspired by reading, those several comic strips back in the day. I think Garfield was the one that kind of got me into this in the first place.
Same. Oh my gosh.
Peanuts. And then I eventually also discovered Tintin as well. So something a little bit more serialized. And when I was younger too, I was also raised in the Asian community. So I was actually inspired by a lot of manga when I was younger too as well. Like Dragon Ball was one of the first ones I was exposed to. Surprisingly enough, Parasite, but it was actually in Korean. So there was that. And so there was a lot of different sources that inspired me to want to go into visual storytelling, mostly because I was fascinated by the technique and the craftsmanship of it, which is why I always love looking at the line work, looking at the composition and design. It's something I wanted to learn for myself. So what ended up happening is, again, as a child, we ended up doodling like our favorite variations of comics and so on, until I started learning more about the process of creating webtoons. I didn't really go towards that direction. At the end of the day, I wanted to make something a little bit more tangible in terms of like a zine or a comic. But I was much more fascinated by the construction of the comic, as well as the construction of the narrative as a result of how the story is told as a visual medium, which actually became very tricky, actually.
Ooh, okay. So you mentioned Dragon Ball and like looking at the craft of things. And I just want to take a side tangent to just geek out about the page layouts of Akira Toriyama in Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z, because like I feel like how he lays out his pages is not talked about enough.
No.
Because like the way that he lays out the panels and the way that he composes a page, it's like you look at a page and you are immediately sucked in because he just knows how to guide the reader's eye throughout.
Oh, absolutely. Because that's the thing I didn't really think too much about. And I guess that goes for a lot of us who actually get started in this particular medium, is the idea that we don't think about the flow or the transition of the narrative, how we guide the reader from one panel to the next, and how we take certain things for granted in terms of what we presume the reader will understand. And Toriyama effectively transitions these panels very effectively, like letting the story kind of flow in terms of how the characters move, how the story flows, and how they interact with each other. These are things I never even thought about until I actually got into creating comics.
Yeah. And when you brought up looking at like Garfield and Dragon Ball and some of these other properties, the thing that stood out to me that was like the unifying theme throughout all of those was like really strong line work. And that was something that I noticed when you sent me, because for the viewers at home and the listeners at home, Sung actually sent me a PDF of a comic that they are working on in progress, which has very, very strong line work. That was one of my favorite things about looking through that whole thing, was being like, oh, these are really bold and very emotive lines. And that's really good. And it's especially for somebody who's like new to the comics making side of things. That's a strength, and you should keep that, and you should keep working on that.
I really appreciate that. Due to the fact that, again, for me as well, I forgot to mention my other inspiration, and sorry for kind of gushing about this.
Oh, you're good. You're good. This is the panel to gush.
Oh, awesome. Oh, another inspiration that, surprisingly enough, kind of manifested during my younger, maybe at 10s and 12s into my teenage era. I'm also fascinated by a lot of the older school Japanese artists too. The ones that even precede Toriyama. Toriyama was one that was the gateway, into comics. But for me, I slowly ended up developing a passion for a lot of the 60s and 70s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Like Osamu Tezuka was one of them for sure. And Go Nagai is another one. Actually, Go Nagai is my main inspiration. I don't know if you're familiar with Go Nagai.
Oh, I know of Go Nagai's anime.
Like Mazinger, Cutie Honey. I do love Studio Trigger sticker lines too as well, which they're obviously inspired by Go Nagai's works as well. So I'm really big on the density of the line work, which is why I'm really big on, again, how I structured all the line work in my comics.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So kind of tangenting off of that, do you find yourself going back to these creators even today, or are there particular creators that you found that you're like, ooh, I really like what these folks are doing? And do you want to give shout outs to some of those folks?
Oh, I definitely still revisit Go Nagai's work simply just because it's a remarkable inspiration for me, since I often don't see that style popping up very often, aside from, again, Studio Trigger, which is the more contemporary representation of it. Oh, sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no, you're good. Like, there's not a lot of people that do the kind of stuff that Go Nagai did back in the day or since.
I know, which is why I'm like, I love this stuff and I wish there was more of it. But at the end of the day, this is why I actually got into creating comics, is because of my because of being inspired by Go Nagai's dense line work, as well as naturally Ken Ishikawa, who does the Getter Robo series, if anyone's familiar with that either, or also.
Oh, if my friend Alex Washburn was in the chat, he would probably be geeking out about this, because he's very into like this particular subset of stuff. So I might have to see about maybe doing a follow-up chat with you and Alex at the same time.
That'd be awesome.
Manage to make that work. I think that would be a very fun chat to sit with.
Oh no, absolutely. That would be a whole lot of fun, because I just love geeking out about, I think it's 60s, 70s, and 80s manga, which often isn't explored too often. But that's one field that like I am still catching up on and still trying to like find more material in that realm, is like the manga of like the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, and checking out all of that work. Oh yeah, please continue. Sorry.
No, that was basically it. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, like at the same time, I think I've been also super curious about, I'm blinking on all these authors, but a lot of the slice of life narratives that are manifesting. There was I'm trying to remember the subgenre of that time period. It's Genki? I can't remember what it's called. Oh,
I know what you're talking about, and I'm also blanking on the name of it.
No, there's like a huge subsection in the 70s manga that was really big on capturing the adult slice of life experience, and I'm totally blanking on the name. I wish I did some research prior to this to be able to allude to them, but no
worries. We can make a follow-up comment in the comments section after the live chat, and we'll do it that way.
Yeah, I know the big one regarding a lot of the Drawn and Quarterly publisher actually releases a lot of these guys' works fairly recently, and I'm just blanking on all of them, as well as a little bit of Fantagraphics have been publishing the works too. So I'm glad it's getting a little bit more mainstream attention. I just didn't have access to them until fairly recently, so more contemporary, even though it is essentially authors from the 60s and 70s, are a lot of those authors that kind of explore the human side of life experiences too at the same time, which are a little bit more adult.
Oh yeah. That's the one thing that I'm glad that Drawn and Quarterly is doing that particular genre of manga, because like it's great that there's like shonen and shoujo, but there also needs to be something that's like representative for like an adult audience.
No, absolutely. And I know a lot of the 60s and 70s had this particular unique genre, and I'm trying to remember the name of these authors. Oh wait, shoot, I think I found one. Who is this? Shoot, it was, I think Shigeru Mizuki is one of them. He was the one that shows a lot of the history of Japan.
Oh,
during
that's
a particular
cool.
time period. He's also, I believe, responsible for the Gegege series, if you ever heard about that one, where it's about a young child interacting with a lot of the Japanese yokai.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, that one. Yes, I'm
Kitaro
familiar
one.
with that one.
Yeah, I believe he's responsible for the Kitaro narratives. I haven't explored too much of it. I just have a very just vague familiarity of it, as well as Yoshiharu Tsuge, who focused a lot on the kind of the general life experiences of the downtrodden in a particular time period. So it's a very time capsule based narratives that a lot of these guys are representing through their work.
Hey, nothing wrong with that. Sometimes a product needs to be like of its time, and that paradoxically makes it timeless.
No, absolutely. And I just love how it's being captured visually. So it captures that feel as well as the technique that's represented by the authors during that time period that I really respect.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's awesome. Okay, dovetailing off of that. I mean, I feel like we've hinted at this a little bit up to this point, but this was a question that was on the list of cues that I forwarded to you. What's your favorite thing about this medium? I mean, we've hinted at it here and there, but is there any one thing, or is it like a bunch of things that you love about this medium?
I really appreciate the flow of the narrative when it comes to a graphic novel or a comic. I tried writing a standard narrative in the form of a book, but I kind of struggled with the flow of it. But what allowed me to be much more expressive in a graphic novel is that the story kind of flows in a very different way that allows me to kind of expand upon a moment as well as condense it. So there's a little bit more. Well, it's a very constricting medium as well as a very expansive medium, if that makes any sense, where you have control of how the narrative flows in terms of how you wish to show it and unveil it to the audience.
Yeah, like comics has a particular set of rules, but once you understand those rules, you can make the medium do what it is that you want to do.
And it's been a lot of fun to kind of play with it and explore, as well as also the technique of representing the story too. Because a lot of the strength of the graphic novel isn't simply just, how do we say this? Simply just the flow of the story, but the idea of how you wish to present the story to make it accessible for an audience. And what ends up happening with the standard narrative, let's say hypothetically, if I were reading something like Catcher in the Rye, just to throw out an example. A lot of strength falls under the reader to be able to understand what the author is trying to convey and how the audience is able to kind of conjure up that imagery. But the graphic novel allows us as the author, as well as potentially artist or whomever we are collaborating with, to choose how we wish to show these moments. And that kind of narrows down explicitly what we want the audience to witness in our stories.
Yes. Having done on my end, I've done written prose and graphic novels before, and there's definitely strengths and weaknesses to both.
Oh, absolutely.
With prose, it's very much like it's almost like you're reading between the lines. So like maybe some people who like really take things literally might not catch in Catcher in the Rye that there's actually a segment where if you read between the lines, you realize, oh, Holden Caulfield was actually molested as a kid. Like that can be really easy to miss if you are only reading it at face value and you don't like read between the lines, as it were. With comics, it's all out there. But the other thing with comics too is that you can play around with body language. This was something that is really encapsulated in a handbook that Will Eisner made. I don't remember which one it was in, but it was in one of his like visual narrative like textbooks where he illustrated how body language and facial expression can make the phrase "I'm sorry" sound different, or like sound different in your head as you are reading it, just based on the combination of the word and the body language of the figure and the facial expression of the figure saying it. So comic artists, I think, can play around with that dichotomy of like, yeah, this is what the character is saying, but what does their body look like as they are saying it? What's on their face as they're saying it?
No, absolutely. I know I'm jumping around a little bit because I know this is kind of close to the last question, but it kind of tackles a little bit about the more contemporary inspiration. Well, contemporary, I just say that in quotes. But for the reason why I constructed the works that I'm constructing right now with nonfiction, it mostly comes from that process, which Art Spiegelman himself kind of explored when constructing Mouse. He is my inspiration for this. He's the main reason why I went to nonfiction, is simply because exploring that very idea of how does he choose to represent his story and the deliberate choices he made that allows us as the audience to kind of contemplate and reflect on those deliberate choices, to understanding why he designed his narrative, a personal narrative, mind you, the way he did when it comes to design of people in history, or the way he chooses to ingrain his own life experiences with that of his father when dealing with the Holocaust narrative. So when it comes to thinking about that process, it's just very fascinating to kind of witness this as he chooses to construct it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. Seeing that like artist process and seeing like the connection from like point A to point B to be like, oh, so these were the creative steps that R. Spiegelman took to go from like making this just a straightforward personal narrative to making it almost like a visual allegory about mice and cats. Yeah. Actually, since you brought it up, I'll go ahead and jump to this question that's in the interview queue here that I have. So you make autobiographical comics. So what was it that spurred you to make the autobio comics? Do you read autobio authors who inspired you to take the leap, or did you just have a compulsion to tell this story?
It's definitely both. I have this sort of anxiety of forgetting my life experiences because brain fog has been a thing for me in the past almost decade.
Fair.
Yeah, and it's been kind of scary losing these memories and losing these experiences, because once they're gone, they're gone. So there's a sense of agency to constructing a story based on one's life experiences. Not to mention, when it comes to my inspiration, Art Spiegelman is the definitive inspiration for why I wanted to create autobiographical narratives. Reading Mouse was very telling regarding how it was kind of an exploration of defining one's experiences. So it almost kind of functions like therapy, where you think a little bit about your life experiences and try to understand them a little bit better. But the interesting thing about that is when it comes to life experiences, they're just events. We're the ones that actually give it meaning.
Right. Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. So when it came to that, it's what's really fascinating about this process is kind of understanding, how do I want to define my life experiences and how do I want to represent them? Which is why when looking at Art Spiegelman's process, I was heavily inspired to, again, try to discover what would be the most effective way of sharing my life stories or life experiences and try to find meaning behind them. Because oftentimes when it comes to my life experiences, it's something I still reflect on and try to understand what these moments mean to me.
Yeah. It's funny because when you mentioned doing this, the first thing that popped in my mind was, because I've done a little bit of work with Crucial Comics before, and they run workshops about how to tell autobiographical comics your way. So and I've considered it before because I primarily do not work in autobio comics. I think the only autobio-ish comic I've made up to this point was a comic that I made about the Lake Erie toxic algae blooms, which I mostly incorporated some autobio context in there to be like, so this is my experience with having to deal with freshwater issues. And now the city of Toledo is doing this. So like, looking at it from like a context standpoint, it's like, it is interesting to see how your life can fit within the context in like a comics contest and making it work in that context.
And it's kind of tricky too. It's kind of, when writing about your life experiences, one has to remember it's not just a sequence of events. What made it very tricky is, how can I make this content accessible for an audience who hasn't experienced this moment? And how do I also try to make it engaging? Because even if it's a series of life experiences, it's also a story. So you have to also recognize that, okay, now I need to construct a story that flows well. And what do I pick and choose to include in my narrative where it does that story justice and has some semblance of relevancy? But it's hard to define life experiences to deem it as relevant or not. For one day, you might think it's relevant, and several months later, you think, why did I talk about that particular moment? It seems kind of irrelevant within that context. And so we as an author or as comic artists pick and choose what we want to share. And it's very difficult at that moment to be like, well, I think this is relevant, but someone else might argue, well, no, that's not relevant. You shouldn't have included that, or vice versa.
Yeah. To that end, there is something to be said about working with collaborators to help with, like, okay, I want to make this story because this is the message that I'm trying to tell, and a good collaborator can help point out when you are straying from that guidepost.
Oh yeah, absolutely. One of my other favorite pieces of nonfiction graphic novels is John Lewis's March. That one's also fascinating and exploring, delving into pretty aggressive history. But the interesting thing is also recognizing how to do that history justice, because it requires a collaboration of Nate Powell and Andrew Aiden, I believe. I forgot. I'm blanking out on.
I forgot the other collaborator's name, but there was a third person who collaborated on that besides Nate Powell and John Lewis.
Oh, Andrew Aiden.
There we go. Thank you.
And I know one of them's the author. One of them is responsible for, again, constructing the narrative. The other one is responsible for illustrating. I think Nate Powell might have been the illustrator. I'm kind of blanking out right now. Someone please correct me.
That sounds about right.
But it is a collaboration of a lot of different people engaging with John Lewis's history. And it's also making sure that you do this history justice, is because when you represent this history in the form of a graphic novel, it's dangerous to have it misconstrued, where one is trying to say one thing and it ends up being represented another. But since there's three people collaborating, it could potentially end up being messy as a result of this, as well as, again, potentially muddling up history, where you want to be careful of not muddling up civil rights history.
Right. I actually haven't read March yet. It's still on my TBR, but there was one comic that I read. It was actually George Takei's They Called Us the Enemy, which also had a number of other collaborators working with George Takei to adapt it into a graphic novel adaptation. I felt like the team did a really good job on that, because there was a mixing of the personal part of the narrative as well as including some historical context. So like in They Called Us the Enemy, there's passages where George Takei talks about, oh yeah, I was a boy and I came across this other boy and he told me to say these things to the guards in English, but I didn't necessarily know what it meant. And it turned out to be a kind of a slur. But then in later passages, it'll be like, so then Mama had to talk with this lawyer, and why she had to talk with the lawyer was because larger, bigger picture context was, detailed more in that. I'm not going to get too much into detail about that, because people should read that particular graphic novel.
It is a good piece as well. And the tricky thing about that, and sorry if I'm interjecting, is
you're good.
The interesting thing about They Call This Enemy by George Takei, and I'm blanking out on who the author was for that, so I'm sorry, is also the responsibility of making sure people who are engaging with They Call This Enemy also learn about this history. And that's where it gets very tricky of doing that history justice, is because there's always a potential danger to misconstrue it. Or misinterpret that history, because a lot of people will engage with the story. It's George Takei. George Takei is quite renowned, so naturally a lot of readers curious about this history will engage it, and it'll be a learning tool. People will learn about Japanese internment from it, and that might be their primary source of learning about this history. So there's a little bit of an onus of responsibility from George Takei, as well as his collaborator, of making sure you do this history justice, but also tying it back to his own personal life experiences, which makes it tricky, because when it came to They Call This Enemy, it was from the perspective of a child. Well, at least George Takei wanted to capture the voice of him being a child engaging with this particular aggressive moment in history. But the deal also with that is that since he's a child, he didn't really fully grasp the gravity of this moment until when he grew older and kind of reflected upon what that experience means. So there's a bit of a balancing act when it comes to representing the tone accurately, because again, he's still a kid. We give him the benefit of the doubt of kind of not understanding the gravity of this moment as a child at the moment of, which is why he kind of scaffolds this as an adult when we see him as an older individual kind of dwelling upon this moment and kind of defining what it is. But it's a challenge of making sure you actually capture the tone accurately to make sure you represent the history with justice.
Yeah. If your autobio comic does sit in a place in history and is a narrative that is not often talked about, like Japanese internment or marching in this specific march of the civil rights fight, like having that context in history does make sense, and it is very important to have that context like around that personal narrative. So that does make sense. I'm also thinking too of there's another Autobio manga actually, Barefoot Gen. Which, yeah, that one. I don't know. I've only ever read the first volume, which, oof, that's heavy.
No, it's a pretty aggressive read.
Very aggressive read, like overtly aggressive. Like I appreciate that it exists though. So about Barefoot Gen, I think with Autobio comics, there can be almost like a spectrum. Like on one end of the spectrum are the folks who want to put their personal narrative within the broader context of history and saying, my story is part of this other story that is relevant to history. And then on the other side of the spectrum are Autobio creators who are like, this is my story. This is my personal story. This is what it means to me. And making it more, what's the word I'm looking for is not like, I mean, on the one hand, they do want to make it personal, but they also want to make it their own, almost like, I don't want to say fairy tale, but like almost.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of like mythic almost.
Yeah, good example that, again, it's kind of like a spectrum when it comes to how you engage with this. You could certainly say, okay, here's the history. I'm just going to talk only strictly about these historical moments. And you kind of take away the personal element of it. The personal element is just the context that leads into the history. Then you have one that's a lot more personalized, kind of talking a little bit about what this history means to this individual, kind of like George Takei's They Called Us Enemies, a little bit closer to that. And then you could go all the way at the opposite side of the spectrum and go completely on your own narrative. And I think the one that kind of, this isn't technically historical fiction. This is, or not historical fiction, sorry. Technically Autobio, but you could see elements of Autobio in it, is Gene Yang's American-Born Chinese.
Oh, yeah. I have that sitting on the shelf.
Yeah, that one is technically not Autobio, technically. But you could easily see Gene Yang's experiences in it, as in like moments he experienced as a child, as American-born Chinese individual engaging with the public school system with different individuals that, again, don't know how to engage with him as an Asian American and making assumptions based around him. Those are things he obviously experienced. But naturally, this is how he chooses to represent his story in a more creative, mythical way, integrating elements like Sun Wukong. Exactly, yeah, the Sun Wukong narrative in there. Elements of magic is present in the story. It's not an Autobio per se, but we could obviously see his life experiences injected within it to produce this story.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you brought up American-Born Chinese as like being on that other end of the spectrum. Because the example that I was thinking of was also Blankets by Craig Thompson.
Craig Thompson,
I would make an argument that I think Craig Thompson's Blankets sits kind of adjacent to American-Born Chinese on that spectrum of Autobio comics.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The whole elements delving into his relationship with his parents, relationship with several people in his own life experiences are clearly inspiration that allowed the story to come into being. So it isn't necessarily autobiographical per se, because there's elements of obvious creativity injected within the story itself in order to produce a story.
Right. Yeah. And it also just waxing poetically about his struggle with faith and his his connection to Jesus being separate from everything else that he experienced up to that point.
Absolutely.
Which absolutely fascinating. And also interesting how he chooses to illustrate that within the graphic novel itself.
That's the beauty behind it, is the idea of how does he choose to explore these questions he has in his life experiences. And that's the beauty behind this particular medium. It's the choice we make in terms of how do we define what these life experiences mean, but how do we choose to show it? Because if it's autobiographical, we are presuming that the audience trusts us that these moments are defined as a life experience, meaning they actually happened. So the tricky thing about Autobio, and which is why, again, there's a huge spectrum of this, which is why one could argue that when it came to Blankets or American-born Chinese, those are closer to that of fiction, but obviously are inspired by real-life moments. Whereas if we go to the opposite side of the spectrum, it's all about making sure we get these moments of history accurate. But when it comes to defining our life experiences, there are moments of creativity that we inject in this medium in order to present them. They're not actually what truly happened visually. We get to choose how we want them to be visually represented, which makes the graphic novel or comic pretty tricky when it comes to capturing life experiences. Because when we define these moments as nonfiction, the audience trusts us that these moments are true, that these moments are fact. But when we visually represent them, there's always going to be that onus of creativity, because we're choosing how we wish to show these moments. And that's where this medium becomes pretty tricky, especially when it comes to Art Spiegelman's Mouse and the way he chooses to represent this history too and what it conveys. Because one of the tricky things about Mouse that obviously got a lot of controversy was the idea that he represented the Jews as mice. And the argument made against that is like, the critics arguing, saying, well, aren't you undermining or potentially undermining this history through this representation? Is it meant for a younger audience because of that design? And Art Spiegelman, clearly said, no, that's clearly not my intent. I'm not writing this for children. If you actually read through it, you'll see it's obviously meant for an adult audience. But that's the assumption that's being made regarding how one chooses to represent this history or life experiences too.
Yeah, that also speaks to, when adults look at Mouse and they're like, oh, this is for kids because it's got mice in it. I think that also speaks to the the almost 70-year-long history of comics and how they were treated in the United States, which is a topic for a different stream. But I could talk about that, and I've actually considered putting together a presentation.
It's a great topic. It's a fun topic to talk about.
Oh, absolutely. And there's so much that you can mine out of it, and so much of it is circling back to being relevant today, which could be for good or for ill. So I could talk about that for hours. But yeah, as far as people looking at Mouse and being like, oh, it's mice, so it's for kids, right? And it's like, did we learn nothing from exposure to anime in the 80s?
No, not to mention the reason why it gets banned partially is the presumption that it's made for a younger audience, taught to a younger audience, and it's like, oh no, this was obviously not meant for a younger audience. At least that was the rationale for why it gets banned in certain places.
Kind of, yeah. And that why certain books get banned, etc., is also
another big topic.
Oh, that is its own topic, and that's something that could be an entire panel put together. Circling back though to the cues that I have drafted up here. So talking about Autobio and how for example, Art Spiegelman illustrates the Jews as mice. One thing I noticed when reading that comic sampler that you sent me is that there's a persona, or a fursona, if you will, for folks who are in the scene and know what I'm talking about. So the question I wanted to ask was, you're doing Autobio work about taking on a persona, and the comic exploring this is done in the style of furries, as I'm perceiving it. Is that additional layer of separation intentional or accidental?
It was definitely intentional, because part of the equation of looking at my own life experience is to disengage or disconnect from it. Instead of trying to perceive it in an intimate way, I tried to see it through a third-person lens to be able to explore it better for an audience, as a meaning to describe these moments without making assumptions about it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, having that separation where it's not so much this is how I experienced it, but being this is how Sung experienced it. And,
exactly.
Yeah.
And a lot of this piece that I'm working on delves upon trauma of identity. So part of that equation is, again, the deliberate design choice in these animal characters, is to be able to kind of disengage with it, but also kind of explore, how can I represent these moments of my own personal life without getting too emotionally attached to it, but seeing it from the third person lens.
It's funny. I had mentioned earlier not doing very many Autobio comics, but there are aspects of one comic that I did a while back called Thoughtful Dinosaur. Many of the sequences in Thoughtful Dinosaur are pulled from my own life. and it was easier to have that emotional distance, to have a character going through it rather than an illustration of myself going through all of those experiences. So there is something to be said about having that emotional distance so that you can look at it from like, oh, this situation was in fact very silly, and it is very silly that this person had to live through that. or being like, oh yeah, no, this situation was not great, and it's not great that that person had to go through that. But having that kind of emotional separation does help with processing and being able to look at the situation and say closer towards definitively. It doesn't have to be 100% definitively, but getting closer towards like objective.
Oh, that's what
like,
it is.
Yeah, getting closer towards an objective truth, as it were.
Absolutely, because when drawing them as human characters, it may be weirdly uncomfortable. If that makes any sense, simply because, again, well, now that I adopted this art style, it's actually a lot easier to draw. I guess it delves into the question beneath that, but it became a lot easier to draw. And I was like, you know what, I'm just going to stick with this artistic style, which is why it kind of bled into my other pieces. And I'm like, well, I haven't really changed. So I guess it's just a consistent, deliberate design choice. But that was the original intent, because this particular piece that I shared with you was essentially my first full-blown project that I wanted to finish.
Ooh.
And fortunately, I finished. Oh, well, I'm still editing it. It's up to about, well, not up to, it's pretty much about 284 pages of exploring this particular instance in my life that I'm still trying to consolidate and better understand, because I clearly haven't moved on from it, which is why I ended up being at this bloated 280 page.
You had a lot of feelings and you had to put it down on paper.
And even then, I'm still kind of exploring it in other avenues in terms of better understanding it through other works. But yeah, I had to put this piece on paper because there's a sense of urgency and agency to this particular life experience that I kind of wanted to explore, that is intrinsically tied to a lot of the trauma that I faced based on numerous different factors. Essentially, writing this piece was kind of like unfurling a whole bunch of cables behind a computer, where I'm kind of like disconnecting things, kind of replacing, moving them around, trying to make sense of how to define it. In fact, during the writing process itself, it was actually a moment of self-discovery, trying to understand this trauma and how this trauma may have impacted me without really realizing it at the moment of.
Yeah, well, it's also one of those, like, your body does have defense mechanisms whenever you, like, are going through something traumatic in the moment. The body will just be like, no, we're not going to process this right now. We're just going to keep on moving. Which, you know, it is a way to, it is a way to survive that. And there's a reason why there is a best-selling psychological book called The Body Keeps the Score, because the body never forgets.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's definitely the case here when it comes to kind of understanding what these life experiences mean and how they're defined. Simply because, again, at the moment of, I didn't think much of it, but then once I look at my own current life experiences, I could see how much of it is impacted by these particular moments in my past that obviously instigated all this trauma, which was obviously caused by particular trauma prior to that. So it's a bunch of layers, and the whole book is essentially, again, unfurling those layers and trying to better understand and how to define them in a way that at least makes sense to me.
Yeah, peeling back the onion and being like, oh yeah, that's connected to this. Oh yeah, that's connected to that. Oh, that's connected to that. Oh boy, there's a lot to explore. Which absolutely totally get that. Okay, so follow-up question. Is the fact that the characters are furries helpful in the creative process, or is it purely aesthetic? Like, we've hinted at it before, but I put this in the cues ahead of time. Which follow-up question is there a statement being made about this choice, or is it just because furries are cool?
Started with the first one, became the later, just because, again, it's a lot easier to draw for me at the end of the day because of that disconnect. There was a thematic purpose behind it. Oh, sorry if I interrupted.
No, you're good. Keep going.
There was a thematic purpose behind why I picked dogs originally, simply because at the end of the day, I wanted to say something about obligation and expectations of roles. Dogs are loyal creatures. They are, again, well, in the most cases, not all, but they are generally known for loyalty, consistency, and even doing things, again, out of obligation. Again, not all of them are like that, but that's the assumption or label we presume when it comes to the way humans engage with dogs. I wanted to say...
that's kind of the dog archetype, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. If I did cats, then it would be a different story altogether. At least the archetype of a cat. But the dog has that sort of consistency.
Mm-hmm. Oh man, now I want to do an Autobio comic where all the characters are cats.
That would be wild.
It would have a very different tone to it, I'll tell you what.
Oh no, absolutely. That would be a very different tone. And originally I was going to do other animals, but I just stick with dogs for the sake of consistency's sake, and I kind of struggled drawing other animals. So this style or aesthetic kind of stuck. And hasn't really changed since, so I guess it became an aesthetic thing. But I did want to make a sort of point about obligation through my piece, and kind of how the notion of obligation and identity kind of fed into that anxiety or trauma of fulfilling those expectations, and how there's a sense of lack of questioning those expectations and just following the rules and doing things as they are for the sake of doing it. Just like how I presume, again, I don't have the mind of a dog, but dogs instinctually do things. There's a sense of instinctual loyalty and commitment to what they do. Again, not all dogs, but if
right. But there's that kind of like understanding in a dog's brain of, oh, you are part of pack, because you are part of pack. We do this.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was the direction I wanted to go with my piece, talking a little bit about, again, one doesn't question the things they do. They simply just do it because they have to. And that it feeds into their role and expectation of being a dog.
Right, yeah, where it's just like, I am dog. This is what dog do.
And at the end of the day, that theme does still kind of stick. So it wasn't necessarily strictly just an aesthetic thing. But once I started working on these other pieces, I was like, oh, no, now it's an aesthetic thing. I haven't really moved on from it.
And now you're sticking to it.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to draw, for me at least, when it comes to designing characters. I do like the abstract simplicity of the characters, simply because when it comes to human designs, I struggle a little bit to play with them. But here I could certainly exaggerate and play with the presentation of the characters, kind of like, because they are visually represented as, in a way, at least stylistically, as cartoon characters instead of characters that are based on realistic human features.
Yeah. Honestly, when it comes to making comics, at the end of the day, you go with the thing that is the most fun to draw, because you will be drawing these images in sequence repeatedly. So,
oh dear God, yeah, that's been my life for the past year in terms of sticking to a schedule, trying to design characters. Like, you know what, these are the easiest to draw, so I'll just draw this for now.
Yep, because you're going to be drawing those characters multiple times on multiple pages to keep that narrative going. Yep. Actually, this leads to I believe this is my final question that I have for you. This being, what is your favorite step of the comics making process? So when I say step, I'm thinking of things like writing out the script, thumbnailing the pages, penciling, inking, coloring, those kinds of steps. That's what I was envisioning when I was drafting this question.
Yeah.
So what's your favorite step of the comics making process?
I'm so big on line work.
Nice.
I love my dense, thick lines, and having the satisfaction of having a line that I'm happy with is remarkably fulfilling. That's why I certainly use a lot of dense lines in my work, but just seeing the craft work of choosing which directions the lines need to go, how they connect with each other and interact, how do they fit within the whole picture of things. There's a weird satisfaction to that process, and that's the one that I usually enjoy the most. The one I dread is looking at script and editing. Simply with that ever.
Yeah, that's fair. You're also working with like 280 plus pages of a script that you're just like, oh no, I have to go back and edit this now.
And it never seems to flow well enough that I'm happy with. But when it comes to art, I give myself a little bit more leeway in terms of how I choose to represent my art. I know I'm kind of struggle a little bit with certain things I'm still learning by doing. I mean, that's the beauty of this field. We learn by doing.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And it's a process of discovery when it comes to what you're most content with design, or what could you employ that is you in terms of the design process. So there's the other element I guess I enjoy also is just the application of what I learn, of continuously working on the design of characters, trying to integrate backgrounds and becoming much more confident with them and trying to do something new. The whole process and journey of making a comic in itself is very fulfilling, albeit very painful, anxiety inducing, and tiring. But
it can be.
It's a fun journey. It's a journey of kind of seeing what direction your techniques will take you until you settle with something you're happy with, where we're happy with the design choices we have, or the way we structure our work, or what field we're more comfortable with when it comes to the design process. There's a lot to explore about yourself when writing that also feels very rewarding.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. It's funny that you brought up that line work is your favorite step, because it is also my favorite step. Mine is for somewhat different reasons, because I'm classically trained as a caricature artist. So lines are like the thing to focus on when you're doing caricatures, because you don't get a pencil layer. You just draw directly, inks, and you go by the grace of God, basically.
I'm in the same boat as well. When I was trained, for me, it was about efficiency, about using your time wisely when it comes to the work, because I took some courses abroad, webtoon classes, and what ended up happening there is they said you don't have time to kind of mull on a work. You have to be very efficient in how you produce it. And one of those equations is making sure that you're precise with your line work and making sure that you get it right and then move on from there, instead of just like, oh, I have to go back and refine this line again over and over and over again, because that does eat up a lot of time, which is why for me, I work at a very fast pace on that idea that I don't want to dwell too much on the imperfections, because at least it makes us human.
Yeah, absolutely. I've not known too many artists who do this, but I have known artists who will obsess over the placement of lines, and I'm like, my guy, you gotta just lay it down and commit. The only way that you're going to learn is by laying something down and committing to the placement of it. Because, hitting Control Z over and over again is just going to slow you down.
Oh, yeah. We just don't have time for that, unfortunately. And it's very anxiety inducing, but one just has to accept it.
Yeah.
Unlike writing out, I can't get over it over and over and over again, simply because it's there. But the art, at least I forgive myself, and I can move on and be like, okay, at least I'll think about it when I'm designing the next page. And it's a learning process.
Yeah, absolutely. That's honestly one of my favorite things about making comics, is that you're always learning with every panel that you draw.
And again, that's very rewarding, as ultimately when it comes to this particular field. And I would say ultimately that is the best part.
Yeah.
Kind of circling back into that is the idea that there is always some element of improvement, simply just because we're engaging with it over and over and over again.
For sure. Yeah. So, okay, we have about 10 minutes left. If anybody who's watching or hanging out in the chat wants to ask any questions of Sung, start drafting them up and posting them in the live chat. Or if you're catching the replay of this, you can leave some questions or comments down in the comments section below. So before we wrap this up, I only have one other question, and this actually was not on the interview cues, but this was something that I wanted to ask since we were chatting a little bit before we hit the live button. So how long have you been making comics, quote unquote, professionally?
Oof. I would argue that November of 2024 November is the first in a long while that I engaged back into it. I have taken classes before that kind of explored the construction of webtoons. I thought about doing webtoons for a good solid maybe about 3 or 4 months until I dropped it. And then it's been kind of like dead for about 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, it was kind of rough. I wanted to get back into it, didn't know how to do it. This year at November, I was actually gifted an iPad, and I was like, all right, let's see what I could do. And that's pretty much how I got my start again, is simply engaging with Procreate, Apple Pencil, or pencil, and jumping right into it.
Yeah.
So it's about, since November, maybe about 8 months. Oh gosh, I get it. November, December.
It's like about 8-9 months ish, because we're recording this in August. Okay. Yeah, that's wow. That's actually like way shorter than most people who I've spoken with.
And it's
So,
still a learning process too, for sure.
oh, for
Because
sure.
I do want to jump into something a little bit more professional. I know there's still a lot I need to work on, but that's the joy of this field.
I mean, I've been doing this professionally since 2013, and I'm still learning stuff every day.
And it's the fun. And my goal, at least for this year, at least, is to be able to attend events. I definitely am excited that I'll be tabling this year for once. That was actually one of my goals. And I was like, oh, sweet, finally, I actually made that happen. It's very fulfilling. Hopefully it goes well.
Nice. Anywhere that you want to publicize that you're going to be like tabling at?
Oh, yeah. I'll be actually tabling in person at SF Zine Fest.
Nice. So if you're if y'all are in the San Francisco area, go and check that out. That sounds like a fun time.
Oh, I'm super excited.
Yeah, I've not been to any of the West Coast Zine Fests before, but if they're anything like the East Coast ones, well, maybe they're not like the East Coast ones, but if it's anything like the Zine Fest that I've been to, I'm sure it's going to be a fun time.
Oh, I'm super excited.
Heck yeah. So, since we're getting towards wrapping things up, if folks cannot find you, if they cannot make it to SF Zine Fest, where can folks find you online?
Definitely on Blue Sky. I had Instagram, but I'm trying to shy away from Instagram.
Fair.
Yeah, for numerous reasons. But yeah, Blue Sky will be the most consistent place while I will be posting my work. Also, I have an itch account too. I haven't posted anything just yet because this month, since San Francisco Zine Fest is at the end of this month, I've been putting almost all my effort into making sure I have something. Well, I definitely will be showcasing 3 different mini comics. There's a 4th mini comic that I want to finish before that event, as well as a 60 or 70 page comic-ish that I'm also trying to finish up to make sure it's available then. I'll also be showcasing a sample of my work that I shared with you, Kelsey, that I'll print out and also make available there at the Zine Fest. But I'll probably also be posting it on Itch as well. It's just I've been super busy with preparing for Zine Fest, even though it's still got a couple of weeks left. But I definitely want to make sure I have everything set and ready for it because it'll be my first time tabling.
Oh heck, I get that because like I mentioned, I've been doing this for over a decade, but I still feel the crunch of like, oh no, there's a show coming up, I got to make sure that I got enough. For sure.
No, it's a lot. It's this is all first time for me, so it's definitely a lot of pressure, but I'm excited. One doesn't learn outside from doing.
Yeah, I believe in you. You got this.
No, thank you. And
but I'll be sure to let folks know to check out your itch.io page, especially after the San Francisco Zine Fest, to you check out any work that you may be posting after your first Zine Fest.
Oh, I'm sorry. And then I think another event that's happening soon. I forgot to mention this also. This was actually a fairly new occurrence. Is I believe next month in September, I believe, somewhere. I haven't had a definitive date just yet. I'll also be participating in, I think it's Queer Zest Zine Fest.
You're also going to Queer Zest Zine Fest?
Yeah, that one. I was like, oh, I think they, yesterday I was just informed that. I was like, oh, shoot. And now, Oh, sorry.
That's awesome. I am also going to be at Queer Zest Zine Fest. It's purely online, and I know last year it took place throughout the month of September. They're probably going to be doing that same thing again, where it's like throughout the month of September you can check out all of the vendors. Because it's online, it's like here's links to all of their pages, and there's going to be panels and stuff on the weekends.
Ooh.
Yes. I know because I know because I will be hosting one such panel on September 6th. So
I'm super excited.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you and I are both part of the Cartoonist Co-op. If you tuned in for my How to Make a Newsletter That Your Fans Will Love talk during Nib and Ink Fest, it's that talk.
Ooh. That's super exciting.
Yeah. Are you hosting any workshops, or are you just going as a vendor?
I'm definitely going as a vendor since this is kind of all new to me. I'm kind of curious how the process is. I don't want to bite off more than I could chew, but
fair.
So I'm super excited to again see how the format is like, how to engage with folks there, and excited to meet new people too. At least due to the fact that prior to November I was completely isolated. I don't really talk to anyone. But then it's more about getting into the community, getting into culture, engaging with folks in the same industry. It's been a fun adventure for sure, but it's all definitely been new.
Yeah. Oh, there is so much to this industry. And I'm still, like I said, I've been at this for over a decade and I'm still learning stuff every day. So the learning never stops. But that's what makes it fun in my mind.
It's been an adventure. That's the best way to describe this experience since November, is literally just learning, discovering how to engage with folks, discovering how to engage in the community, as well as knowing what opportunities out there as well, like the Zine Fest, which I'm super hyped for.
Oh, heck yeah. I am so hyped for Queer Says Zine Fest next month. And I'm hoping that you do well at SF Zine Fest.
Oh,
Good luck. Absolutely.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. And with that, I'll go ahead and do some final pluggings. So again, if you want to check out Sung's work, you can check out Sung on Blue Sky. I have the link up on the screen here. You can also check out Sung on itch.io. Here is the link for that as well. And if you want to check out any of my stuff, you can do so by checking out my webcomic, The Legend of Jamie Roberts, at thelegendofjamieroberts.com. Check it out if you like genderqueer pirates and dragons. You can also check out kelseydcrawford.com for everything else that I do. Sung, Jeremy just subscribed to your Blue Sky.
Oh, thank you, Jeremy. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and
my day.
yeah, they will be checking out your itch page shortly soon.
Oh, sweet. There's not much there at the moment, I promise, but something will be there soon to prepare for SF Zine Fest. So probably within a week or so.
Yeah, I believe in you. You got this.
Oh, thank you, Kelsey.
All right, that is all we've got for now. Thank you all so much for watching. You are awesome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me today.
Yes, thank you so much for hanging out with us today.